MLB Manager 2015 is an exciting mobile baseball game that puts you in charge of a Major League Baseball team as you guide it through unlimited seasons of championship chasing. You can run your team on an Android smartphone or tablet, as well as on iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch. Trade players, sign free agents, set your lineups and pitching rotation, call the shots from the dugout, draft prospects and watch them develop into stars or busts, negotiate contracts, and much more. Like Out of the Park Baseball 16 for PC and Mac, MLB Manager 2015 features an official MLB.com license that includes real logos for all 30 Major League Baseball teams, as well as historical logos. MLB Manager offers 3 modes. You can take control of a team during the current season, go back in time as far as 1901 and play through history, or start a fictional league with one of 4 pre-configured setups. The 2015 version of the game offers some new great features, starting with the ability to shop a player around and field trade offers from other teams. The trading AI is even better this year too. You can also simulate ahead for weeks, months, or years at a time with a Do Not Disturb feature that lets you watch your league quickly grow. And now, you can put players on the new short list, so you can easily keep track of their careers even after they leave your team, hopefully with few regrets. We've also increased the number of players on the season statistical leaderboards to 10 per category, as well as added new career leaderboards so you can watch the races to the top of home runs, strikeouts, and other categories. There's even more in MLB Manager 2015, so visit the App Store or Google Play to get your copy of the best mobile baseball management game today.
And welcome to the opnoobs.com Developer Talk. As always, we usually do open on the Twitch channel. You can always ask questions. Tonight, we actually will be giving away 2 keys to the game to the 2 best questions. So as it's going, please feel free if you have any thoughts, concerns, questions about the game, the development, and to a smaller degree, general baseball, because that might be some part of the conversation tonight. Tonight's game is Out of the Park Baseball 16 by Out of the Park Developments. I'm Nick Baislock, and we are joined by Brad Cook, the PR and marketing manager of Out of the Park Baseball tonight. How's it going, Brad?
I'm good. How are you? Do you have a meltdown going on your end?
Yes, it is being handled correctly at the moment.
That's
Sorry
cool.
about that.
I've got a couple rabid dogs here who keep freaking out over a cat outside. So if anyone hears, they're actually pretty harmless, but they sound kind of crazy. So.
Well, we have 2 crazed animals then, and that's not a problem, I don't think. Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, we'll go with the basic question first. Can you just give a brief kind of summary of Out of the Park Baseball?
Yeah, it's a game that lets you run your favorite Major League Baseball team. You sign free agents and sign guys to contract extensions and trade players and set your lineups and your pitching rotation and your strategies. You call the shots from the dugout during games if you want. And you pretty much do everything a general manager as well as the guy in the dugout does as you kind of run your team. And we've got full minor leagues in the game, so you've got a whole minor league system. The June draft is in there, so you draft prospects and they move their way up the system, and you can just play for many years, decades, even centuries into the future, and just keep running your team.
When you play centuries into the future, are you able to automatically draft aliens?
Actually, there is one I know kind of funny thing that happens. There are news stories in the game where interesting things can happen to players, or it can be funny injuries and other stuff. And there are actually there's like a story where a guy kind of gets hurt in a car crash, and when you hit a certain year, it becomes a hover car crash. It's kind of funny, but there are no expansion teams on the moon or anything like that. But yeah, you can just kind of keep going. I've seen people go in the 2300s, 2400s. They just keep going.
Yeah, there's a few that I'll get into some other questions about it, but I've seen some that are on the forums that are quite a bit into the future, and that takes a lot of time and dedication, and that's something I'll touch on as well. But this is not a game. Not only is it not a game that sometimes you can just jump right into for some people, but it's also a game that I mentioned it in my review. The longer you play it, the further down the rabbit hole of how deeply you kind of want to go, you can go. There's almost no end to how far that is that you go.
Yeah, that's true. Rabbit hole is exactly how I've described it many times when doing interviews. I mean, there's so much you can do, and there's tons of customization. I mean, when you play into the future, you could actually create your own stadiums that are futuristic looking if you want, and import those into the game. You could very well create futuristic locations or whatever to move teams to. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff if you want to do that. There are people who do all kinds of funny things. I mean, I wrote an article for our blog about a guy who created a Tolkien baseball league. So he's got teams full of orcs and elves and dwarves, and he modified the names list so it only produces Middle Earth names, and he even changed the injuries so you can get what was a Brandywine fever or something like that, and
So
all kinds of goofy stuff.
were they able to draft from like actual Tolkien, like Middle Earth places as well? Instead of say the Dominican Republic, they could go to like the Shire.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, he changed the locations and everything, and he's even got they're playing the stadiums are located in actual Middle Earth places, in Gondor or whatever. So yeah, it's it took a lot of work. It's an online league actually, so it's all full of human GMs. It's been going on for like I think a decade now, and they just keep going and going. So yeah, you could do just about anything you want.
Yeah, like I said, I'll touch on the fan base a little bit just because there's some questions I have about. It's a very dedicated group, and I don't mean that in any negative way for sure, but it's a very dedicated group.
Yes, yes.
Actually, I'm just gonna say it now because it's just a funny thing. I actually reviewed this game for another website in 2007, and I actually did a preview of this and the dreaded baseball mogul. And my preview of this game for the 2007 version still lives in a forum post on the Add the Park development forums, in which these people on it were not very kind to me, and I was like, all right. So actually, when I had the chance to review it again, I was like, you know what, I'm coming back.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, you see that with any dedicated fan base. I mean, on one hand, we've got very dedicated, loyal fans who love us, and that's great. On the other hand, yeah, they can get a little rabid sometimes, and they're major staunch defenders of the game. And when people bring up competing games, they can start getting a little worked up, or if there's a bad review. And I mean, I take it all in stride, and I know Marcus, who created the game, does too. But yeah, we have our little army of fans who are always kind of watching our back, I guess.
I didn't even see anything that negative. That was the best part about that. To this day, I
Yeah.
actually give out that link to people and say it's nice to be hated sometimes because it's just just a funny thing.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, we don't get. I mean, our Metacritic scores are always pretty high, and we always do really well. So yeah, there's not much to worry about in that regard for us.
All right, we'll talk about. So this is a yearly installment game right now. A lot of the times, people always ask the question. I think someone actually asked it in chat, even though that was already a question we were going to ask. What's the big features like in this year's 15 or in 16 versus 15? What's changed?
Well, the big one that a lot of people know about already is probably the Major League Baseball license. So we've got official logos for all the teams. We've got the actual stadiums. We've got 3D versions of all 30 Major League Baseball stadiums as part of that, which is pretty nice. And we can do things like use a World Series trophy instead of that goofy kind of little chalice-looking thing that we used to use. And then actually that also covers the minor leagues. So all the minor leagues as well as the minor league teams all have their official logos in there, and then historical logos too. So if you want to go back and play as the Expos, you'll have their logo, or the St. Louis Browns, or old Phillies teams, or whoever. Especially teams that have had their logos change a lot over the years, and those will change as you play forward through time. That's kind of the big thing. And then we added a bunch of other stuff. We changed the way the owners function. The team owners have goals now that they kind of set out for you. It's actually kind of funny. I know one of the goals I see a lot of people have been talking about online is the try not to suck completely goal. Which, like, if you take over the Phillies, you get that as a goal, or the Rockies. Your owner will give you that as a goal for the current year, which is kind of funny. But then, he may want you to win the World Series within so many years, or rebuild your farm system, or whatever. And that ties into the manager and coaches system. So those guys have expanded personalities now and certain preferences. And if you play only as a GM, and then you may find yourself in a little bit of a tug of war with your manager. He will probably not let you touch certain strategies on the team. So that kind of adds some complexity to it. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, too, in the game. People can check it out on our website.
Yeah, that's actually the don't mess it up mode is one, or don't suck too bad mode. That is actually a feature because I like to create my own weird strategies. Like one of the things I did for myself just to make it more difficult was I pulled like a kind of a Billy Bean, even though it was the Mets. I was like, I have to be Moneyball now because that's how basically they've been playing. But I actually made myself have even less money on purpose, so I could only have essentially scrubs that I grew into players like the Oakland A's to a degree. But
Right.
like there's certainly like the rabbit hole. There's a lot of interesting things that correlatively you can start to do just by playing it and kind of doing whatever you want.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can. There's a commissioner mode in the game that you can turn on, which allows you to change the finances and switch things around. You can move teams between cities or rename them or edit player ratings. There are always those people who kind of grouse a little bit about their favorite players not being rated where they think they should be, and so turn on commissioner mode and change them. That if you don't like it. Yeah, it's there's definitely a lot you can do. I mean, I've seen people tweet things like, "Oh, I spent 2 hours hiring coaches for my minor league system tonight. Still haven't played a game yet." But you can also turn stuff over to the AI too if you want. If you don't want to bother with stuff like hiring coaches for your minor league teams or whatever. So which is handy.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, just because it's actually potentially my favorite part of out of the park baseball, is the era's ability to do not just the historical leagues themselves, but then the way the eras break down and picking which era you get to pick. So I just wanted to know how popular is it's called the Power Years in out of the park baseball. And now that would be for anyone that's not sure what that means. It's really kind of like quote unquote like the juiced era to a degree of where Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were like just slamming home runs constantly. I really, really, really enjoy doing that era. But like, is there any era that is known to be that you yourself or that fans particularly like?
That's a good question. I know we do gather data on how people play, and we look at it. I haven't heard as far as historical goes. I know historical's not as popular as other parts of the game. I mean, it's got its popularity. I think I think a lot of people tend to like to replay the eras often that they grew up in. I mean, I grew up in the '70s and '80s and like to take over, a Phillies team from that era. I mean, they were good then, which helps, but it's kind of a time I kind of remember. So I think there's a lot of nostalgia that kind of drives which eras people play in. And then, if they don't, if it's not a specific era driven by nostalgia, it's usually a more recent year. People will take over a team from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or something. Especially if a team's had some rough times, and see if they can undo some moves or make some changes, and see how things would have played out differently. Like a team like the Brewers that kind of fell off, a couple years ago, after having some success, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's actually one of the for me that's one of the best parts about that whole area of the game specifically is just kind of creating this mythical world of like I took over the 97 St. Louis Cardinals before they got McGuire. And so I was playing around with just like how do we get to the point where this team is good enough to start getting a free agent next year kind of a thing. Even though the signings were already like handled by the game, so it's going to happen anyway. But like I liked to I just wanted to play around with those types of things. And that's again it continues to go back to this is a game, and I'm going to broach this question next, just as from your opinion. But this is a game where you can kind of come in and you can play, pretty much do almost nothing and click some buttons and have a good game going on, or you could just go infinitely deep into an abyss of just numbers and statistics. Um, and that's probably one of the things that was interesting to me in general is when you're doing that simulation, so you can simulate year to year or you just go statistically. In any of this historical simulation, how does it know, how does it justify, for instance, like a giant bump in home runs, let's just say, or how does your stimulation work with those types of factors?
Well, by default it'll recalculate the player ratings based on how they did historically. So as there are a whole bunch of historical modifiers you can actually see if when you get into the settings, and so it'll start bumping up home run totals automatically, and then it'll bump up guys, McGuire, Sosa, Bonds. I mean, all those guys will start getting their ratings adjusted accordingly based on how they actually did in those seasons. And then, of course, you can change that if you want. You can turn that off and just kind of let it progress in a totally different way. But that's pretty much how it tries to kind of keep things more or less in line with reality. So you have something that approximates what actually happened while allowing for a certain amount of variance.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the amount of statistical gathering, obviously it's a stat sim, but between the scouts and historical records and everything else, I imagine it's with the sheer quantity of number that's involved, I imagine it's probably not that hard to kind of extrapolate at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the however many decades it's been that they've had fairly decent records. Yeah, and certainly if you're looking at those power years, there's all kinds of data available. That's not hard. So, yeah, I mean, we've got all that. We've got all the players' historical stats. So, I mean, when you start an historical season, you can have all that information there, all going all the way back to the beginning of baseball, actually. So, Babe Ruth will be in the game. He'll be, I don't know, 100 years old or whatever he'll be. Um, but all those guys will be there. The Hall of Fame will be populated. You could actually turn on commissioner mode and bring Babe Ruth back if you want, and change his ratings and reinsert him into modern day if you want to do something like that. So yeah, I mean it's all there, and then with the current player ratings, it's all based on we use Baseball Prospectus's Pacoda system to generate the current player ratings, and then obviously from there anything can happen. I mean, you can play out this season, multiple times and see all kinds of different things. Chris Bryant can explode, live up to his potential, or maybe not, or you could play 15 years in the future, he could become a Hall of Famer. So anything can happen as you play forward.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. Like I've been to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. I've seen it, and it's like in general, baseball is pretty much history because every game is so meticulously tracked. And then with more advanced metrics now, obviously, there's a little bit different. A lot more information being kind of put out there. But in general, you could still look at a box score from 60, 70, 80 years ago and know kind of what happened. So I feel like
Right.
that's probably one of the most enjoyable things for people that are stat heads in general. But on that kind of a note, what someone asked a similar question, but what if you're not a baseball fan or you're just trying to try a new sim and you just want to try a game out? What are your suggestions, or do you have thoughts on the best way to try to play this game if you haven't experienced playing either this game or a game like this?
Well, assuming you've got a basic knowledge of baseball and, hopefully you have a favorite team, I would say just load up the current season, the 2015 season, pick your favorite team. And most of the stuff is set, like your minor league system set for control by the AI by default, so you don't have to worry about that. And so you could just go in and kind of check out your team and look at your lineups and start making changes. Look at your pitching rotation, your bullpen, and maybe the strategies are set by default, so you don't have to worry about that at first. I mean, I would recommend just kind of checking out the basic stuff. If you understand the sport, you know what to do there, and then there's that play menu in the top right, and you could just play out a game or two and kind of get a feel for how that works, because you can call all the shots from the dugout. You can decide when to steal, when to put on the hit and run, when to pull your pitcher, all that stuff.
Yeah, actually, when I was doing the review for this game, I streamed the game, and I thought like, oh, no one's gonna watch because it's a statistical simulator. I had like 20 viewers, and like three or four were asking me questions like, "Can you do this?" And It's like, yes, you, oh, okay. Well, I don't work for them, but you can do these things, and I suggest picking it up because it's worth trying out. Um,
Right.
Especially now that you have an MLB license. I've just been kind of wondering in a game like, let's just say Madden, or any statistical game, a sports game of any kind, not necessarily even just a simulator. Players themselves sometimes pick it up or see it, and then they complain themselves about their own ratings or their team's ratings. Have you ever had any experiences like that at all?
No, Pat Neshek, who's currently pitching for the Astros, is a fan of Out of the Park Baseball. I interviewed him for our site. There are a few minor league guys who I've talked to. There's a guy named Zach Javovsky, who's a pitcher in the Braves farm system. A couple other minor leaguers I'm trying to think of offhand. A guy named Travis Weaver. I forget where I think he's pitching somewhere right now. And then and then Kurt Schilling, a lot of people probably know Kurt Schilling, a retired pitcher, is a big fan of our game as well. But no, I haven't had anyone really complain. I mean, Pat for example, hasn't said anything about how he's rated in the game. He kind of, if he has issues with it, he hasn't said it to us. Actually, I've got a funny story of that. When I interviewed him, I asked him about, of course, managing himself in the game, and that was the year that he was in the Orioles farm system, and they traded him to the A's, and people may remember he was called up to the A's that year and ended up pitching in the playoffs, and that was kind of a cool story for him. It was kind of his breakthrough. But he said, of course, he called himself up in the game and had a pretty good season. And then in the off season, he tried to negotiate a new contract with himself, and the virtual Pat Neshek blew him off and wouldn't negotiate with him, which could happen in the game. Players may just decide for whatever reason they don't want to talk to you, and they just refuse to negotiate. And the virtual Pat Neshek just wandered off and became a free agent. Like no one else signed him. And the real Pat thought that was pretty funny. He thought it was pretty funny that the virtual version of himself blew him off.
He did like the sad Hulk music and just walked away off set.
Yeah, exactly. Like the end of every Hulk episode, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was pretty funny. People get into it. There's another guy, a guy named Steve Carino, who's a professional wrestler. And he loves baseball, and he loves Out of the Park, and I've interviewed him too. And he's a Phillies fan. He grew up in the '70s and '80s too. And one of the things of the game is you can get fired. You can turn it off if you want, but your owner can actually fire you if you're not good enough. And during the interview with Steve, he was telling me about how he was, and he travels a lot for wrestling, so he takes the game on his laptop and plays in the hotel or whatever. And he's on a trip for wrestling an event somewhere, and at 2 a.m. he texts his wife, I just got fired. And his wife's like, what? Like, what do you mean you got fired? He goes, the Phillies, they fired me. I can't believe it. I hate them. And she's like, oh my God. Just leave me alone.
But you know what? That's a general example of the devotion that some fans have for this game in general, just across the board. I feel like the people that play this game, especially as I've played it more, and I've just continued to kind of play it, because I feel like the Mets are fool's gold, and I know that that's going to end at some point. So I would rather just live in the glory of a simulated version of the season than the real baseball season that's unfolding, probably. But I've definitely seen that it's something I've continued. I've said a couple times, but it's hard to understand. The one thing I will say is if you do have a lot of questions, definitely visit not only the Out of the Park baseball website on outoftheparkdevelopments.com, but also the forums are a dramatically helpful place if you're a newcomer, I think, for people. So the question of how do you pick this game up, definitely that's one thing where there's also now tutorials and other things that I've seen on your guys' YouTube channel. But
yeah,
if you're feeling at all froggy and afraid of playing a game like this, just try it and give it a whirl, because it is fun as long as you're into statistics a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and our website is actually OOTPdevelopments.com. And there's a link at the bottom. There's a community section, and you can find our forums there. And yeah, we've got a lot of longtime players of the game who hopefully won't turn on you again, Nicholas, and for anything you write. But,
I mean, hey, if they do, they do. It's that's
the rabid hordes, but they're pretty good with newcomers. People who come by, ask questions. There's even a forum dedicated just to kind of people who are new to the game. So yeah, you can get questions answered there. I try to spend as much time there as I can and answer questions too. So yeah, we try to be helpful as much as possible.
One of the things I wanted to talk about too is for in general, this game has and it's part of the community, but it has like a thriving kind of a mod community to a degree of it's almost not even really fully mods to some degree, but they are, they do alter the game. You talked about the Lord of the Rings people that were playing their own, they created their own thing. But there's a couple different like the re-renderings of, certain 3D park models and things like that that you can download. Do you guys have any specific ones that you like, or you say, man, I wish we had put that into the game, or I wish we had more time to be able to put into the game?
That's a good question. There's a guy in our forum who created some pretty cool utilities that generate logos and jerseys for you and stuff like that for fictional teams, which is pretty cool. I don't know if that's something we'd ever want to put into the game, but that's something. I mean, and yeah, I mean, there's some really nice stadiums that people have built, 3D stadiums, especially like some of the historical parks. I don't know if there's anything specific as far as the customizations go, but there's a lot of cool stuff out there. There's the add-on Central in the game. For example, you can download an all-time greatest league that's got every team has its all-time greatest players on it, which is kind of fun to play with. So you can play with players from every era for every team. And we even last year we did a what we call a quick start that has the 1994 season, and it starts the day the strike started. So you can pick up that season. It's got all the standings and the stats and everything as of that date, and then you can play forward to the end of the season, see if Gwynn would hit 400, see, of course, what would have happened to the Expos if they could have actually won the World Series, like a lot of people were hoping for, that kind of thing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's again. I was always, like I said, I'm a big fan of the era stuff, myself. So anything involving historical everything was really what I liked the most. Like I like to generate the new seasons and go forward, but I kind of have a soft spot for just recreating historical stuff, and seeing all of that information in the game already is really really cool too.
Yeah, it's all in there. All those players are in there, and yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. I mean, like I said, I've taken over some Phillies teams. I had a Phillies team in the '90s, and I got into a bidding war over Randy Johnson and managed to sign him. He kept coming back to me, demanding more money, and I kept going up and up. I think I signed him for like $8 or $9 million a year or something. He started at like 4 or whatever it was. Which is kind of funny. I've had Eddie Murray playing. I've had Eddie Murray and Mike Piazza playing on the Phillies, and so I've pulled off trades and signed free agents and stuff like that, which is always kind of fun to do. It's kind of fun to you can radically remake a past team if you want and see kind of how they would have performed with a very different roster. So yeah, that's always kind of a fun thing to do too.
As a Mets fan, the idea of Piazza hitting dingers for the Phillies just it crushes my heart.
I know.
But I mean, that's part of the fun too. It's like I said, like even
Right.
whether you're recreating historical things or just in general now, if you can figure out a way to swing a deal. I had a similar situation where I was trying to sign just a kind of a low end pitcher that had decent possibility of a prospect like 2 or 3 years into the future, and he refused to. I offered him money. He said it was too low, and he went back to the Dominican Republic, I think, or whatever it was. He just never came over. He never signed with a team, and like he just disappeared. That's the kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, and it happens in real life, right? I mean, it does happen. So, actually, like when you do the June draft, you have to sign those players just like in real life, and you can draft guys out of high school, and just like in real life, they may decline to sign with you and go back to school and go to college, and then they can pop up in the draft again, 4 years later when they're done with college. And then, we've got the posting system in the game now. And, last year we had added the Nippon baseball in Japan, and then the KBO in Korea, and the Taiwan Baseball League and some others. So we've got the posting system now, too, so players can, kind of move back and forth around the world like they do in real life, which is kind of fun if you want to enable that in the game, too.
When are we going to have the football simulator that you guys have allow for someone to make the choice when you draft them for baseball and they say, no, I think we're going to play football?
yeah. No, Jameis Winston's in the game in the draft, which is kind of funny. I've seen some people post some screenshots of him as a pitcher on their teams. They drafted him and had him had him in their farm systems, which is kind of funny. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we've got Beyond the Sideline football in the works for release this year. We should figure out some way to integrate that, or maybe we could have a Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders kind of situation to have guys playing in both sports, have them move between the games. I don't know how we would make that happen, but that would be pretty funny if we could do that.
Yeah, I was almost thinking of like even like Elway, like you draft them and they're like, no. Well, they get drafted in the football game and it's like, I don't want to come to you. So they go, you
Yeah.
transfer over to the baseball game. They're like, then you can
Right.
draft them.
Right, exactly. That would be pretty cool if there was some sort of like integrated world like that. We'll have to figure out if we could do that someday.
We can talk about it real quick before we move on to the Q&A section. MLB Manager, which is, although we are a PC site, I'll let you plug it because that recently came out, I believe, pretty recently, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, around the same time as the other game.
So that's a phone version for Android and iOS, I believe. Of
Right.
essentially, it's a phone version of this. So I'm just kind of plugging it because it seems like it'd be enjoyable to play if you're a fan of this series.
Yeah. MLB Manager 2015. You can find it for iOS and Android in the App Store, those relevant app stores. You just do a search and find them, or go to our site, ootpdevelopments.com. It's just $5. It's a very stripped down version of the game. It doesn't have full minor leagues. It doesn't have a lot of the. It has some editing functions, but not nearly the same breadth of customization, and no online leagues and stuff like that. It does have the Major League Baseball license, though, which is nice, so you can have all those logos in there, including for historical play. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a nice little sort of appetizer version of the game where you can kind of, especially for people who want to get their feet wet with this kind of game and see what it's like. It's an easy way to do that.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about it for long because I want to open up the Q&A
Oh, right.
soon. But I do want to mention the fact that this game, Out of the Park Baseball, has an online mode that's kind of like if you're a remote fan of fantasy sports, Out of the Park Baseball is basically a fantasy sport generator. When you play against other people, the bloodthirstiness of it becomes a lot more enjoyable to a degree.
Yeah, that definitely. There's a lot of those people are some of our most hardcore fans, and yeah, I mean they get into rivalries and they get very intense with trades and things like that, and it gets pretty competitive. Every last couple of years, including this year, I've run something called the Grand Championship League that has. This year we had representatives from 32 of Out of the Park Baseball's online leagues that kind of were competing in like sort of a grand championship, basically like a World Cup almost, of our online leagues, which was a lot of fun. And yeah, people get pretty competitive and it gets pretty intense, and that's certainly a fun thing to do. If you don't want to play against a computer, you can try to see how well you can do against human opponents.
And in most cases, I did not do well, but it was fun. That's what matters.
I probably get killed too. I actually haven't done any online leagues. They probably kick my butt.
You don't use your name and make sure they don't know it's you because
Yeah,
then they'll really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I use my real name and I suck, then they're going to go on our forums. I can't believe your PR marketing guy's so bad. I should have his job. Yeah, they'll call for me to be fired or something.
All right, so people have been asking questions during the chat.
I saw the team of Michael Jackson clones. I'd like a full team of Michael Jackson clones. What's the probability of that? You can actually do that. You can create a player called Michael Jackson and give him ratings, and then you can actually clone players. So you can clone him 25 times and have a team. There's actually someone at Fangraphs last year did a thing. He cloned Bartolo Colon, D. Gordon. Who else was it? Jose Altuve, I think, and Koji Uehara. He had a team of 25 clones for each of those guys, and ran a 4-team league with that, which was pretty fun. Oh, Adam Dunn was one of the guys. It was Adam Dunn, and he ran a season with that. It was pretty funny.
What was the results of that?
I'm trying to remember. I think because obviously, like the Adam Dunns, sucked at pitching. They were pretty good hitters. I'm trying to remember now. I think the Uehara's actually won the championship, which is pretty funny. But yeah, like the Adam Dunns, I mean, the pitchers were awful. They were getting allowing they had games where they allow 40 or 50 runs. It was just it was a bloodbath for them a lot of times. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I imagine that's the true battle of like a pitcher duel versus like a hitter duel, kind of a thing. Of it, you just have a
Right.
team of all pitchers versus all hitters. You'll see the pitchers will probably be able to get a hit once in a while, but they're not. The batters are not going to be able to pitch very well.
Right, exactly. That's kind of yeah. You can do that though. You could clone a player and have him pitch. Have guys who are position players pitch and see what happens because
And
they're all rated for pitching. They're just all rated poorly.
and in the case of the Michael Jacksons, you could put Michael Jackson pictures everywhere if you'd like. You could put pictures in the game if you would choose to, because that is an option of customization.
Yes. You player profile pictures. Yes, you can, and you got different eras of Michael Jacksons. You got the young Michael Jackson, maybe the Thriller era, maybe the later years. You know, you could have various versions of Michael if you want on your team, and I guess you could use it as a five, so you could have the other Jacksons and have teams full of them if you want, and have like a
Team
five.
full-
This conversation is going out of control.
Nobody wants a team full of Tito's.
Yeah, this is going. This is definitely going down that rabbit hole, isn't it?
Alright, well, I'm going to start with a couple questions from the audience. We're going to keep the two best ones for last. These are the questions. Whoever asks those questions are basically going to get the Steam keys that we got. Thanks for donating that, man. Brad, we appreciate it. Alright, let me start with a very basic one. I think it's a good place to start. Is there any difference between OOTP 15 and OOTP 16?
Yeah, I mean, besides the Major League Baseball license, which is a nice thing, you got all those logos in the game right off the bat. But yeah, I mean, there's the updated rosters. So you've got the full opening day rosters, and then you've got the team owner goals I had mentioned, and we've got improved finances and the manager and coaches system, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, there's always a bunch of new stuff every year in the game.
Okay, the second one, I'm going to try not to mess that up because I'm not an expert, as you probably have noticed, because I was the guy streaming the games. I'm very sorry about that. Is it possible in OOTP 16 to have historical play with real evolution and relocation and stop certain teams from moving?
Yeah. So when you play historically, it's not something that we brought up earlier, but yeah. So the leagues will, American National Leagues will expand when they really did. Teams will relocate when they really did, but you can stop that. So you can stop the Expos from moving to Washington D.C. if you want. So yeah, but all that does happen, and real players show up when they really did, and you can actually have real players show up on their actual teams, or they can go into the draft. So if you want a shot at drafting Mickey Mantle or whoever, you can do that.
The next one is very important to people like me, especially with French accent, who've been growing up most of their life with a soccer ball and nothing else.
Right.
Something that actually in Europe is called football. I like to make a point out of that. How easy is it for a guy like me to get into this game, since I don't know much, or actually I don't know anything about baseball?
Yeah, I mean, it helps to have a basic baseball knowledge first. Might help to do a little reading online, maybe watch a couple baseball games, kind of learn the rules, maybe even try an arcade style baseball game first to kind of understand the basics of how the sport functions before you kind of get into a management game. Because I mean, there are, football managers, the huge, soccer game in Europe that everyone loves. And I have seen a few Europeans who are football manager fans, and they'll buy our game just because they love management games. And then they're kind of like, so what does a second baseman do? I don't know. They start doing kind of funny stuff because they're not sure how it works. And I've, to try to help them out, or people on our forum help kind of explain things to them. But then, like we said, you can always go to our forums and get some help too and kind of learn things. But yeah, there'll be a bit of a learning curve to kind of get up to speed on all that.
And this is a question I actually personally have to ask this is a very unconventional game by all means. I mean, not just OOTP 16, but it's a long tradition of games that don't necessarily appeal to the casual gamer. Are you surprised in any way by its success? Not OOTP 16, but just the tradition that came out of it. And do you think that most people who play this game are, of course, big baseball aficionados?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes without saying that I think most of the people who play the game are big into baseball. We've got again, people on our forum, and we've got people on our forum. There's a guy in our forum who's like a scheduling savant. I mean, he can tell you about like Pacific Coast League scheduling in the 1940s and stuff like that. I mean, there are people who just, I mean, just dive deep into just the sport itself.
What about you, Brad? Are you a guy that like was born and raised in the world of baseball?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I grew up as a Phillies fan. I've never, kind of gone that deep into it. I mean, I never knew a lot about things like the Rule 5 draft, for example. It's something I kind of learned about a little bit more from playing the game, or how minor league options work and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I was always someone who was a fan, but I certainly learned a lot about how the sport functions and how the front office functions and all that stuff by playing the game.
That's a good leeway to one of the things we always like to cover during these interviews is we focus on the game obviously, and then we tend to zoom out of it and try to look at the teamwork that's behind the making of it all. Can you share some thoughts and a little bit about the working process, and that ties into a question that somebody asked is what was the most difficult part of the development of OOTP 16?
Well, as far as the development goes, I don't know what the toughest part was. I mean, we went through a lot just with integrating all those baseball logos. My Major League Baseball had to approve everything, and there was a lot of. It wasn't too bad of a process, but there was just a lot of little stuff like move this a couple pixels over, or change this, or we can't see the trademark on this logo, stuff like that. We added a programmer, a guy named Matt Arnold, over the winter. He did a lot of work with Marcus Heinzen, who Marcus created the game originally. And actually, for people who don't know, Marcus grew up in Germany and still lives there. He lives in Hamburg, and he's a big Red Sox fan. And so Matt went over there for a few months over the winter and worked with him on the game. And I know Marcus really appreciated that because he was able to offload a lot of stuff to him.
Your development team, you would say, has been a cohesive one for many years, or is it a team that you see a lot of people coming in and going?
Yeah, it's been pretty cohesive. I mean, Marcus created the game and put out the first version in 1999. It was just him. I mean, it was a one-person operation, and then a guy named Andreas, who handles our financials and some other stuff too, came on board and worked with him and kind of worked on the online aspects of the game. And it was really just the two of them for many years. A woman named Daniela, who is also in Germany, is our graphic designer and does all that stuff. And we added a guy named Joran, again in Germany, who's a 3D programmer who's done a lot of the 3D stuff on the game and worked on some other things. But it's been pretty stable. It's a very small, stable group. I mean, Marcus has never decided, I'm going to go out and hire half a dozen people and kind of go all out with the game. It's kind of been a slow and steady kind of incremental growth. I'm actually the only American working for the company. Believe it. We've got
funny.
We've got the hockey game. The producer of that is in Vancouver, and actually the football game is coming out. Francis Cole is the developer of that. He actually lives in the UK, I remain the sole American
in California
for the company. Yeah, in California. So, but yeah, it's been pretty cohesive. We haven't had a lot of turnover. It's always been a pretty small, pretty core group.
I'm sure there's a lot of passion in it all. Before I move to the very last two winning question, I've got to ask one from one of our writers, Joe Mack. It's an important one. It's when will you have the Morgan Freeman reading the play-by-play?
that would be a pretty nice option, wouldn't it? We do have the text-to-speech enabled. I've heard it works decently in Windows with kind of what's available there for Windows with text-to-speech. I've kind of heard it in action a little bit. I'm on a Mac, and I don't think it works very well, if at all, on a Mac. I haven't really messed with it, but yeah, it'd be cool to if there's like a Morgan Freeman module for Windows text-to-speech.
He might be open to doing it. You might be successful just contacting him directly. He might be a baseball fan.
Yeah. I don't. I can only imagine what he would charge us.
Okay, the last two questions. One's more serious than the other, but still, I think the funny one should be taken seriously in its answer. The first one is, what's the process like to get MLB licensing?
It wasn't so bad. They approached us last year and wanted to know if we were interested in the license. It kind of started, the discussion started last summer, and Marcus kind of had some chats with them. And after the World Series, it kind of accelerated from there, and they ended up, signing a contract. And it was not as onerous as people might think. You might think, geez, dealing with a large organization like that, they're going to demand huge payments and enormous royalties. But it wasn't so bad. I mean, for a company as tiny as us, I mean, we're certainly one of their smaller licensees. It was a pretty good process, and they haven't been bad to work with at all. So it's gone well.
Okay, and the very last question is, how do you have the time to scout all the minor leagues?
Yeah, well, we've got a whole rosters team for that. We've got a lot of longtime players of the game are part of our beta team. We've got a kind of a little beta team that kind of beats up every update to the game and lets us know if there are any issues before we put it out to the public. And then we've got a rosters team too. Lucas Berger and Howard Woolfolk run the rosters team, and they do a great job. I mean, we use Pacoda for all the major league players, and then pretty much all the top minor league prospects. And yeah, a lot of those other guys are rated by hand, so they will subscribe to things that only scouts subscribe to get information. Someone may even go to their local library to get information if it's not available online, or whatever they have to do to find statistics and do that. So yeah, we have a pretty dedicated team of people that work on that. I'm not sure how large it is, but there's probably a couple dozen of them who do it.
Well, that's it for me. Thanks a lot, Brad, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Brad. Thanks for your time. That was interesting in general because I had a couple questions about not a Michael Jackson baseball team, but that ended up being a pretty good highlight, I think. Um, Thank you for your time. I think we're about done here. Thanks for watching the stream tonight on opnoobs.com. You can visit opnoobs.com. You can obviously see our Twitch. If you're already here, then you know that. Brad, do you want to just throw out the URL of your site again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, OOTPdevelopments.com, and from there you can see us on Twitter and Facebook, and then we're twitch.tv/OOTP Baseball if people want to check us out there. I want to do some streaming on there too, and do some stuff there this year.
We should do an online league with you guys.
That'd be fun. I wouldn't mind doing that. Yeah, just let me know. We'll do it. We'll set it up.
Fred, I believe we are done. I believe we can.
Thank you, guys. Thanks everybody for coming.
you.
We'll move to the trailer, and we'll see you next time.